In a village with an exquisitely beautiful lady lived a horrible witch. The witch had a hideous appearance with messy hair and an abnormally thin figure. But the most severe problem was actually the terrible stench emanating from her body. She was known as the Cursed Witch. She kidnapped little children to feed on their flesh, placed curses on people to eliminate them, and caused an epidemic to spread throughout the village. The beautiful lady, who could no longer stand by and watch, gathered the villagers to help her cast the witch away into the dark forest. After that day, the village was at peace, and what became of the exiled witch in the forest, no one knew. In the present, a mother warns her children, who beg her to let them play, not to go into the forest where the witch lives, fearing she might eat them. The kids laugh and run off to play, still chatting about the witch. Nearby, two men in capes overhear them and wonder why the children are calling them witches, thinking the kids must be referring to them. At the Valencia manor, Princess Ariadne and her father, Lord Valencia, discuss the prince's upcoming visit to the village. Lord Valencia privately questions why a prince would come to such a small place when rumors suggest he doesn't usually show interest in just any woman. As he ponders this, Princess Ariadne scowls and yells about the audacity of a certain lady at the gate. Her father tries to calm her and even offers to handle the situation, but she insists on doing it herself. The lady, Layla, who is the Baron's daughter, is being refused entry. As the gatekeeper argues with her, Princess Ariadne steps in, offering to speak to Layla and send her away. Once alone, Layla explains that she's out of candles and hasn't received supplies from the manor in 3 months, leaving her with nothing to eat. Angrily, Princess Ariadne questions why they should keep supporting her, insisting Layla is old enough to manage on her own either by marrying and asking her husband for help or by finding a job. She opens the gate, gives Layla some money, and tells her to buy what she needs. Layla hesitates, explaining she can't go to the market. Ariadne, glaring, takes the chance to insult her for her smell. "What will I do if I start to stink because of you?" she sneers. Calling her a filthy witch, Ariadne storms back into the manor. Later, Layla walks back to her cabin in the forest, noticing she's injured from the long journey through the rain. It took her half a day of walking to reach the manor and return, yet she gained nothing from it. She thinks about how she needs to clean, repair her dress with the little fabric she has left, and stop the roof from leaking. But without light, how can she do any of this? Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to take the money Princess Ariadne offered. From the moment Layla was born, her parents neglected her because of her strange smell. A year later, her sister Ariadne was born and soon grew to despise her as well. Even the nannies refused to care for Layla because of her odor. Eventually, she was cast out to live in a shed away from the manor, and the years quietly passed. She spent 10 years in that shed, and when she turned 10, they banished her to a cabin deep in the forest. Now, as she sits at her table, her fists clench, her mind swirling with thoughts. She remembers her grandfather's words, who once told her that every living being has a purpose. She held on to those words for the past decade, trying to survive, but she still can't seem to find her purpose. Lost in her thoughts, she's startled by a sudden banging on her door. No one has ever dared to come near her cabin, thanks to the rumors her sister spread about her being a witch. Confused, she wonders who could possibly be at her door. Jumping from her seat, she questions if God is playing a cruel joke on her as she approaches to open it. All she wants now is for God to send her a merciless savior. To her surprise, when she opens the door, a young man stands there, fully cloaked in a cape. Layla had never been this close to anyone before. Even her father, during his rare yearly visits, kept his distance. The young man smiles warmly, thanking her for opening the door. He explains that he had lost his way while hunting in the rain and asks if he could rest for a bit. As Layla hesitates, wary that he could be a robber or worse, he pleads with her, offering to pay generously. He pulls out some money and hands it to her. Though tempted by the much-needed cash, she refuses and instead allows him inside. But no sooner had he entered than she grabbed a weapon, warning him that he could stay only if he does exactly as she says. He raises his hands in surrender and agrees. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that he might have some hidden motive. She briefly wonders if she should have just sent him away, but considers the heavy rain and the possibility that he is truly in danger. She offers him a chair, still holding the weapon for her own defense. The young man complains about the darkness in the room, asking why there's no lamp. Unaware that she has no oil left to light one, he seems puzzled. Layla finds herself wondering why he hasn't mentioned her smell, something everyone else made a point of doing. He pulls a piece of jerky from his coat and offers it to her, but she refuses. He tries to learn her name, and while she's hesitant at first, she eventually tells him. Then, he introduces himself as Bioust. As she stirs the soup she's making, he attempts to compliment it but admits he can't because he lost his sense of smell. Surprised, Layla stops what she's doing and asks how that could be. Bioust explains that when he was younger, he had fallen off a horse, and since then, his sense of smell had never returned. Smiling, he jokes that it's unfortunate he can't guess what kind of dish she's preparing. Layla, still processing his story, simply says it is a cabbage soup. As she stands there, her mind racing, she suddenly hears him groan. A flash of suspicion crosses her mind. Is he just pretending not to smell her? But to her surprise, Bioust reveals that he might have injured himself while hurrying to her cabin earlier. Alarmed, she asks if he's hurt, and he confirms, adding that he'd need to get it checked after the rain passes. In that moment, a familiar memory resurfaces. She recalls the looks of disgust and contempt people had whenever they caught the scent of her. No one could hide their revulsion. She turns away from him, coldly instructing him to leave as soon as the rain stops. But then, Bioust glances at her with a strange look, silently noting that she isn't ready for him to fully devour. What could he possibly mean by that? The next day at the Valencia manor, Bioust, Ariadne, and Lord Valencia are dining together. As they eat, Bioust suddenly pauses, putting down his fork. Concerned, Lord Valencia asks if the food is not to his liking. He smiles and reassures him that the meal is splendid. During their conversation, it becomes clear that Bioust is addressed as Your Royal Highness, suggesting that he may be the prince they had been anticipating at the manor. As the conversation flows, Bioust casually mentions that he lost his way in the forest the previous day and came across a cabin. Do you know who lives there? He asks. Lord Valencia initially denies any knowledge of the place, but after some hesitation, admits that while the forest belongs to House Valencia, it's so vast that it's impossible to keep track of every part. Bioust presses further, pointing out that it seemed as though someone was living there. With no way to avoid the topic, Ariadne steps in. She claims they hadn't mentioned the cabin earlier out of fear it might cause him discomfort, but now it seems impossible to keep it a secret. Intrigued, Bioust asks her to explain. Ariadne begins, saying that a cursed witch lives in the cabin, a wicked woman who casts deadly curses on anyone who dares to cross her path. She emphasizes that the witch is known for her horrid stench, so overwhelming that even approaching the hill near the cabin would leave anyone gasping for air. She adds that as a member of the imperial family, Bioust is under divine protection, but even that might not be enough to shield him from the witch's foul odor. If anything were to happen to him, she warns, they would be plagued by the guilt of failing to protect him. With that, she begs him to avoid the cabin, and he graciously agrees. However, as Bioust listens, his mind drifts back to his encounter with Layla. If only Ariadne could smell the fragrance coming from Layla, he muses, she'd never be able to say such things. The moment he caught the faintest hint of that sweet scent in the forest, his body had moved toward it on its own. There were no flowers with such a sensual aroma. It awakened something primal in him, an untamed instinct that surged with every breath, turning him into a wild creature desperate to claim what it sought. As he reflects, he recalls how the cabbage soup Layla had served was barely edible. Though it was technically food, it felt wrong to even consider it a meal. Then, there was the candlestick Layla had been holding. Candles were a luxury in that area, affordable only to the baron's family or a few wealthy merchants, and yet, in that dilapidated cabin, such an item was present. Bioust couldn't help but wonder if there was some hidden connection between Layla and Lord Valencia. Still lost in thought, he notices Ariadne watching him closely. He gives her a polite smile but inwardly wishes it were Layla sitting across from him instead. Much later, Ariadne is seen escorting Bioust to his room. As they walk, he can't help but reflect on how the schemes of lower-class nobles lack refinement. The Baron had tried to claim that the prince's attendant looked tired, just to create an opportunity for Ariadne to be alone with him. Knowing how his attendant would do anything for money, Bioust figured the man had eagerly accepted the bribe to go along with their little ploy. Still, he thought to himself, this is preferable to them shoving the princess into his room in just her undergarments. As they continue down the hallway, Ariadne suddenly stumbles, leaning into Bioust's body. She slides her hand over him as she regains her balance, apologizing for the fall. "Thank you so much for catching me," she says, pressing her chest against him. Observing her act, the prince inwardly notes how pampered and spoiled she must have been by her foolish parents. In the capital, women like her were common, but in a small village like this, she probably got away with manipulating others using her looks. The only thing she has going for her, in his eyes, is that she faintly resembles Layla, but even that isn't enough to excuse such arrogance. Lost in his thoughts, Ariadne interrupts by suggesting, with a bold smile, that perhaps he would like to be escorted to her room instead. Disgusted, he shoves her away and coldly advises her to leave at once. Glaring at her, Bioust tells her he's already memorized the layout of the manor and doesn't need her to show him to his room. "Enjoy the rest of your night," he adds with a scowl, turning and walking away, ignoring her calls to stop. He's been disgusted by the whole situation from the start, the princess, the baron, the manor. All he truly desires now is the sweet, elusive scent of Layla. When he enters his room, he immediately calls for his attendant, Shuri. The man rushes in, quickly offering an explanation. "I just wanted to warm up your room, Your Highness, and then return right away." As Bioust begins undressing, he asks, "How much did the Baron pay you?" 500 shillings, Shuri admits, "and they promised me another 500 if everything went as planned. But I've already given up on that." Bioust shakes his head, uninterested in the details of the bribe. Instead, he orders Shuri to gather information about a cabin in the Baron's forest and the woman who lives there, someone named Layla. "Some say she's a witch," Bioust adds. Shuri's eyes widen in concern. "What if she really is a witch? What if she curses you?" Bioust brushes off the worry. "Just find out what you can," he says, before instructing Shuri to prepare candles and a horse for the morning. As his attendant leaves, Bioust contemplates how little has changed since the ban on witch hunts a decade ago. He can easily imagine the cruelty Layla must have faced all these years. Even someone like Shuri, from the capital, is cautious around her. How much worse must it be for the locals? They probably all believe the worst about her, ostracizing her, treating her as cursed, even her own parents abandoning her to a life of isolation in the woods. He smirks to himself. That must be why she acted so defensively, hissing at him like a stray cat that's been rejected. Her life is pitiful. Meanwhile, in her cabin, Layla can't stop thinking about Bioust. "Why did he leave money even though I said I didn't need it?" she wonders, her thoughts circling around their brief encounter. After some contemplation, she decides he was probably just being polite, as her grandfather had always taught her. Rising from her chair, she strips off her clothes and steps outside into the cold night air. In her undergarments, she wades into the frigid lake beside her cabin. The water bites at her skin, but she endures it, hoping that by washing herself often enough, she might reduce her stench. With the money Bioust left, she can't afford candles, but at least she'll be able to buy some lamp oil and even a bit of meat, something she hasn't had in over a month. But there's one problem: she'll have to go to the market in her current state. As she thinks about it, she recalls how Bioust didn't ridicule her like everyone else. He had been kind, grateful even, and left her money without fear or disgust. Unlike all the others, Bioust wasn't afraid of her. After washing up, Layla set out for the market, her face hidden beneath a cape. As she makes her way down the street, villagers begin to grumble about a foul stench in the air, though none could pinpoint its source. She hurries to a nearby meat stand, eager to get what she needs and leave quickly. But as the butcher begins preparing her order, he too starts to notice the smell. Panic flickers in Layla's mind. Should she run, find another butcher, or even steal the meat and bolt home? Just as she wrestles with her thoughts, another customer arrives to place her order, but the butcher insists on serving Layla first. Moments later, the new customer wrinkles her nose, complaining about the stench and accusing the butcher of selling spoiled meat. Furious, she storms off, vowing to take her business elsewhere, while the butcher looks around in confusion, wondering aloud where the smell could be coming from. Then, he turns to Layla and bluntly asks if it was her. His demeanor shifts instantly. Filled with rage, he begins shouting, demanding to know how a beggar had snuck into his stall. He even accuses her of having no money, assuming she planned to steal the meat. Without warning, he shoves her to the ground, spits in her face, and mocks her audacity. But then, as he looks closer, recognition dawns on him. This was no ordinary beggar. She is the witch. The word spread like wildfire. Villagers began murmuring, their whispers growing louder as they question if it is truly her. The butcher points at her, describing her appearance ugly, with matted blonde hair and a revolting stench. When they realize he's right, the crowd scatters, pleading for her to spare their lives. The butcher, trembling now, begs her not to curse him. Layla rises from the ground, her eyes cold, and takes a step toward him. With a calm but firm voice, she orders him to hand over the meat she had asked for. Panicking, the butcher scrambles to comply, offering to give her anything she wants, even refusing her payment in fear. But Layla, her voice rising in anger, shouts that she isn't a thief. She pays for the meat, then turns and heads straight home. As she nears her cabin, she's shocked to see Bioust standing there, calling out her name. Tears well up in her eyes, and without hesitation, he rushes over to her, asking softly if she's crying. She bursts into the cabin, breathing heavily, but to her surprise, he comes right after her and asks what she's thinking about so intently. Angrily, she yells, telling him to explain himself and why he followed her. But before that, she demands to know his reason for coming back to her cabin. Then, he leans closer and replies that he was merely concerned that such a beautiful lady was living all alone. Frowning at him, Layla inwardly says that she already knows that she's not beautiful, and she especially knows that she has no qualities to attract any man. Confused, she asks if he's a pervert, and in response, he asks what gives her such an idea. "Well, I smell," she responds, but he remains undeterred and asks for more reasons. After she hesitates to give more, he reveals that he has something to give her and reaches for the candles he brought. As he lights up a stick, he mentions that he couldn't stop thinking about how dark it was in the cabin the last time. Also, he was worried she might have still forgotten to restock, so he brought her some candles. "This many?" she questions, glancing at him, but he only lets out a grin. At that moment, he recalls that Shuri swept up all the candles in the manor last night in such a way that the Baron will probably have to dine in the dark tonight, but that's no concern of his. So, he turns to Layla and reveals something honestly. When she allowed him to rest in her cabin a few days ago, he felt as if he had met his savior. He further explains that the rain was pouring hard that day, he was utterly lost in a foreign environment, he was already long separated from his party, and he feared he'd end up freezing to death whilst wandering the forest. He was entirely grateful for her inviting him into her cabin, warming the place up so he wouldn't get cold, and even preparing some hearty soup for him as well. He adds that he returned because he wished to repay her kindness, and he couldn't stop thinking about the soup he had that night. Mumbling, Layla tells him that all this is still too much. So, he tries to change the subject by requesting for her strawberries, and in the process, he asks where she bought them. She replies that she picked them herself, and he immediately mentions that he'd like to have them since they were personally picked by a cute lady as herself. Triggered, she flares up and tries to shut him up, but as she speaks, several thoughts linger in his mind. He's discovered a few things about her. First, she gets angry when he mentions how cute or beautiful she is. Second, she always tries to repay her dues, or if there's something she wants, she'll be willing to give something else in return. And third, she avoids eye contact whenever he smiles. Staring at her, he continues thinking about how her scent is ingrained in every corner of the cabin and wonders which part of her he should taste first. She catches him amid his wild thoughts and quickly asks why he has his eyes closed all of a sudden, and he replies that he's just a bit tired. Then, he immediately brings the injury on her hand to her attention. He reaches for her hand and tries to console her, but a realization immediately hits her: this is the first time someone has ever touched her. He pulls her closer and begins licking the wound, catching her off guard. Startled, she asks what he's doing, and he calmly replies that he's licking her wound. He further explains that it's what people usually do to help wounds heal faster. But that's a lie, he only recalled what Shuri once babbled on about a while back. However, a lady living alone in a forest likely wouldn't know that. But on a second thought, isn't she originally supposed to be the Baron's daughter? As he continues licking the wound, his fangs appear and he inwardly comments on how sweet and delicate her blood tastes, almost to the point of driving him mad. Layla yanks her hand off his, but he holds her close and whispers that when he's with her, he feels as if he's changing. Then he whispers, "Come with me, I shall rescue you from this rotten gutter."